Behan, what was your most outstanding experience on this historic flight?
I suppose it was when the clouds opened up over the target at Nagasaki. Target was there pretty as a picture. I made the run, let the bomb go. That was my greatest thrill.
There was no atheist in a foxhole, and men who never prayed before lifted tired and bloodshot eyes to heaven and begged the Lord to end that awful war. They told him of their homes and loved ones. They told him that they'd like to be there. I believe the bomb that struck Hiroshima was the answer to that fighting boy's prayer.
Say, did you see that city where the first atomic bomb was dropped?
Yes, Fred. We flew over Hiroshima for about half an hour.
It was a shambles, huh?
A shambles. It looked like Ebbets Field after a doubleheader with the Giants.
The group had been told to select some targets in Japan that had not been bombed. In other words, they wanted virgin targets. And the reason behind it, even though not given to the group at that time, the reason behind it was that they wanted to be able to make bomb blast studies or bomb damage studies on virgin targets once the bombs were used.
So it's August 7th, 2022. I'm Dana Durnford. Hope everybody's doing good, if that's possible on this planet. So which terrorist group dropped the bomb on... Now, the first one I showed you was Nagasaki, was a plutonium bomb. It was the second one bombed. Hiroshima was the first one bombed. This caricature really sums it up, don't it? Which terrorist group did that? The idea was to attack the civilians. Because everybody thinks, for some reason, that soldiers are going to fight other soldiers. It doesn't work that way. We've never seen that before. Well, they show you those depictions on TV, but generally they attack the population. They're the biggest deaths, are the so-called civilian. The people who fund the war, right, are the biggest victims of the war. The serial killers that participate in it, you call them soldiers or something. They like raping all females, and they like to kill. Atomic bomb hits the Japs. So the Japs, of course, is an incredibly derogatory term that I prefer to use personally, but look at the terrorists that the Americans went to bomb. The second atomic bomb hit the Jap. Again, that's a bigoted and prejudiced and biased and racist word. Jap, which I actually happen to like, of course, but port of Nagasaki. There's the victims right there. There's the soldiers that the Americans needed the nuclear weapons to blow up. The Japs say all life is gone in Hiroshima. Anybody that survived don't have life left in them. The Japs. In fact, I think that's what I'm just going to call them from here on out, the Japs. But I'm only talking to the nuclear industry, of course. I like the Japanese. Bless their hearts. I'm strictly talking about the nuclear industry and the universities and the medias and the so-called authorities. The Hiroshima weighed 4 tons. Was 12.5 kiloton, thereabouts. give or take a killer ton or two. Nagasaki weighed 5 tons. Well, Little Boy was a uranium bomb. Fat Man was a plutonium bomb. Russia joins war on the Japs. Such a derogatory term. Atomic bomb in use against the Japs. So is it just me, or do I see an incredible amount of bigotry and racism by the world's media? Why isn't Nagasaki, Hiroshima increasing in radioactivity 70 years after, like Chernobyl? Well, they actually did increase a lot about 11 years ago when Fukushima melted down. But a nuclear bomb was, say, 15 pounds or something of uranium. And Chernobyl was 9 tons of fuel that allegedly, could be more than that most likely, but 9 tons is confirmed to have atomized an aerosol. And then the rest of it is still splitting the atoms. So it's perpetually making radiation. And it'll do that for millions of years, no doubt. A nuclear bomb, you're talking about millions of degree temperatures, it atomizes and aerosols. Everything it comes in contact with, is ionized and radiated too, and atomized and aerosol. But there's no nuclear meltdown going on, right? Because it's a detonation. And why would you ask the question? I wonder. But world's greatest destroyer, atomic bomb hurled at the Japs, the Philadelphia Inquirer. So the word Jap was used to demonize the victims, which were the women and the children and the civilian, so-called, the people who never lifted arms. And so this one, where's he to? That guy, he was the captain of the Enola Gale. So let's play that little clip.
So with this preliminary indoctrination, we got into the airplane and took off. Once we were airborne and in the air, I then left the pilot's seat of the airplane and I crawled back into the back where the enlisted men were. I got them all together back there, and we poured some coffee out of the thermos jugs, and I told them actually what we were doing and what we were carrying at that time. And the weather being clear at our primary, which was Hiroshima, there was no decision left. I mean, we were on the way to the primary. So that part of it was perfectly routine. As we came in from our initial point to the bomb release point, it was again routine. We were bothered not in the least by any kind of fighter opposition, no flak. We didn't see anything to cause us any concern, so that we were able to concentrate strictly on the bombing problem. The bomb was released. We executed our turn away as we had been directed. The bomb blast hit us. It hit us in 2 different shock waves, the first being the stronger. This, as I say, was a perfectly unexciting and routine thing up until the point of taking a look at the damage that had been done. And then it was a little bit hard to realize. It was kind of inconceivable as to what we were looking at there. We passed comments back and forth in the airplane. We took pictures. And by the time we had done that, I became concerned that we better quit being sightseers and get out of there. And we were gone and off of the coast in a matter of about 20 minutes from the time that the bomb was released.
we have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won.
We dropped the bombs on the Japs. Right? Like, I hate the nuclear industry in Japan. I hate Japan's media. I like the people. I hate the universities. Despise them, actually, in Japan and worldwide, but particularly Japan. So, okay, so the victims, we got a poll tonight about the victims of Japan, which is everybody except for the military, the media, and the universities. Was it an evil crime to only study external contamination of Hiroshima and Nagasaki's human guinea pigs? Because everybody at Hiroshima and Nagasaki are guinea pigs. We got the lowest turnout in votes tonight I've seen, which is normal for censorship, right? So, 77 years have gone by. Last year, Prime Minister Suga, they call him Suga, just abandons appeal of the Black Rain victims' lawsuit. That was about, because a lot of people associate rain after a nuclear accident with radioactive fallout on the ground, so to speak, but it's airborne. You can see it there, right? It's going to be airborne. And what this headline means was that after 76 years, the Japanese government decided not to oppose the victims who were seeking medical help for being blown up and inhaling radiation. The government refused to acknowledge that people inhaled radiation for 76 years. And last year, they gave up and accepted the handful of people that are still alive 76 years later, which was last year. This is extremely important to the Hiroshima and Nagasaki victims. These are, anybody who goes there is a victim, as you'll see as we get through the documentation. He decided on July 26 to immediately grant relief to the 84 plaintiffs involved in a lawsuit regarding recognition as atomic bomb survivors. Imagine how pathetic your country is when you can't be recognized as a victim. The plaintiffs of a foreign country bombing you. The plaintiffs sought to be recognized as habakusha, which are radioactive people, basically, from the nuclear bombs in particular, right? Because they were victims of black rain, what's known as black rain. Well, radiation doesn't have a color, right? That fell on Hiroshima in the days after August 6, 1945, atomic bombing. The statement in particular raised a serious doubt about the internal exposure to radiation, to the ingestion of contaminated food and water. But you had to breathe the air. You were in the middle of a nuclear wasteland. There's zero possibilities you didn't breathe an absurd amount of radiation. But not like a nuclear meltdown. This is different. This is a nuclear bomb. But it has certain attributes where the plume that you see rising, that's going to be radioactive. Everything that's consumed in that is going to be atomized and aerosol, ionized and radiated. So it's a lot. It could be 1 million tons, right? That's ionized and radiated, and it was atomized and aerosoled. So it's absurd to suggest that they didn't inhale, consume, drink people always touch their mouth and their eyes with their hands, right? So they would have been incredibly radioactive. That's the radioactive plume. It went 12 miles up. Sugar bowed to strong calls from the Hiroshima Prefect's municipal government to not appeal the High Court ruling. For 76 years, the nuclear industry and the government has fought tooth and nail to deny the victims recognition. They refused to acknowledge, and what it was about was refusing to acknowledge that they inhaled radiation. It's I know this sounds like impossible, and most people who are not familiar with the subject would say, "No, that's not true. There's no way the government would do this for 60 or 76 years." It's now, because that story came out last year, we're covering in particular, so it's 76. In its ruling, the Hiroshima High Court, first off, they built their city back on a nuclear bomb crater. The absurdness of absurd. And then it says nobody had any adverse health effects. Because if they acknowledged there was any adverse health effects, then you have to acknowledge building the city back on the nuclear wasteland was a crime in itself. So even if the plaintiffs did not have illnesses like cancers, which is normally used in defining the victim. So if you don't get cancer, allegedly, then you're not a victim. And it's just, there's, like, the logic doesn't exist in this narrative at all. Let me try this again so you can wrap your mind around it. So the relief should be provided even if the plaintiffs did not have illnesses like cancer. So there's 1,800 other illnesses will typically show up before cancer. Cancer is typically latent. So heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, schizophrenia. There's actually 1,800 illnesses because what happens is your body attacks the radiation that's sequestered in your muscles, your organs, and your bones with red blood cells every second of every day for the rest of your life, which means you have a decrease in with white blood cells. You have a decrease in red blood cells because the white blood cells are doing that. And so the decrease in red blood cells, it means you have less oxygen and less nutrition being carried throughout your body. In the case of a huge amount of radiation poisoning, this is catastrophic to your immune system. Your immune system now is under siege because of radiation throughout your body. It attacks it all day, every day for the rest of your life. So that's a cause and effect. That's the evidence that you have been sick, right? It's very easy to determine, is all I'm saying. And for what they've done is beyond cruel, but that's Japan. Japan, so-called authority and military and government, are surreal. Their whole legacy is surreal. Nothing about crimes against humanity for the last 100 years plus. So saying the victims, these people who are in a nuclear wasteland, had no adverse side effects from that, if it was their kid, they wouldn't say that, right? The High Court also says if an individual is denied recognition as a habakusha, it is the responsibility of the administrative branch to explain why. And that the High Court also raised the prospects of including health problems of individuals who ingested radiation-contaminated water or food. Again, you'll never hear him talk about breathing it in, because you're in that environment. You can't filter it, even if you had the best of the best respiratory equipment. You still can't avoid breathing it in. Rather than only those who had, so they only acknowledged external radiation. They did acknowledge radiation, but only external. I should have started off with that way back at the beginning of the video. So they do acknowledge external radiation, and they have several 100,000 studies on external radiation. But there is independent internal radiation studies that have been commissioned and showed huge doses to the internal, but the official government refuses to acknowledge those studies exist for still ongoing now, 77 years. Oh yeah, you got an external radiation, but you never breathe it in. You don't breathe. Rather than only those who had external exposure to the black. Now, the only acknowledgement is black rain. It doesn't matter if it rained or not, in the context of it's a nuclear bomb crater. It's an atomic plague zone. It's a radioactive nightmare. Now, because they sent in their military, the Americans did, and universities. So they can't acknowledge internal radiation because otherwise they couldn't send them in. They couldn't rebuild a city if they acknowledged internal doses. It gets even creepier, unfortunately. One high-ranking health ministry official said if the standard was finalized, uses the precedent in other lawsuits, government's policy regarding compensation for the Fukushima action would be turned upside down. Because Fukushima, they only acknowledge external doses. They don't acknowledge internal doses. Try wrapping your mind around the evilness of the nuclear industry, and you'll actually end up in a mental institution. Ministry officials have long argued in the black rain case that ingestion of food and water would only add up to a small amount of radiation that would be insufficient to cause any health problems. A single atom, now they like to measure it in millisieverts, microsieverts, or unisieverts, or something like this, which is not how you measure it. You measure it in what the Geiger counter is telling you, atomic decays per second, in your body pulsing energy every second. Atom bomb dooms the Japs. Man, they were racist. The media, Chicago Daily News, there were some racist pigs, eh? So, if you're there, you're going to get external radiation, but not internal radiation. Internal radiation only comes to those who don't smile, apparently. Atoms hit Nagasaki. Russia attacks Japs. The San Francisco Examiner. So all your media were bigoted and biased and prejudiced and racist. Okay, so you got to go back to March of 1945 to really appreciate the big picture. The firebombing of Tokyo. Have you heard about this story? This will make you feel all warm inside. Between 80,000 and 130,000 Japanese civilians were killed in the worst single firestorm in recorded history. In recorded history. What the Americans done to the civilians in Tokyo, which was Tokyo was known as Paper City, because all the houses were made of paper, rice paper. So they were like, well, let's catch them on fire. It's how they done it. It was 340 planes or something that flew at 500 feet and dropped napalm on paper houses where children and women and kids were. Not the military, but the children and women and kids. And 16 square miles was set on fire. Incinerated around 130,000 women and kids. In a firestorm, 16 square mile firestorm. And every time people tells me that, and it's happened over the years where they'll tell me their dad or their grandfather or whatever was in the military and killed lots of Japs, so-called Japanese, right? And there's this incredible disconnect. You can see them like they're very proud of their grandparents. And the cluster bombing of downtown Tokyo had been approved a few hours earlier. It composed roughly 750,000 people living in cramped quarters in wooden frame buildings. Setting ablaze this paper city was a kind of experiment in the effects of firebombing. It would also destroy the light industries called shadow factories that produce prefabricated war materials destined for Japanese aircraft factories. 334 bombers flying at a mere 500 feet dropped their loads, creating a giant bomb fire fanned by 30-knot winds to spread the flames throughout Tokyo. Masses of panicked and terrified civilians scrambled to escape the infernos. Most of them were unsuccessful. The human carnage was so great, the blood-red mist and stench of burning flesh that wafted up sickened the bomber pilots, forcing them to grab oxygen masks to keep from vomiting. The raid lasted slightly longer than 3 hours, and in the Black Sumida River, countless bodies were floating. Clothed bodies, naked bodies, all black as charcoal. It was unreal, recorded one doctor at the scene. So what I'm saying is that the military wasn't a military, it was just cruel, sadistic serial killers. This was cruel and sadistic. This wasn't winning a war, this was just being cruel and sadistic. Do you remember the video I showed you them celebrating in the streets in America? And the academic world is just literally goblins. Evidence supporting radiation homeostasis in the atomic bomb survivor cancer mortality data. This group of goblins that are studying the Japanese like human guinea pigs were claiming that the lack of cancer was because the radiation was good for the Japanese. And they actually produced a study in 2012. Atom bomb rips the Japs. It's such a bigoted word to use. 75 years after the Hiroshima bomb, a wife and husband's art still devastates. Their art is, if I remember correctly, from their memories, right? Of people rescuing. Okay, and so people were thrown 500, 600, 700 feet up in the air, straight up, and they come down and were pulverized. And so was horses and pets and stuff like that. Children were sucked out of the schools with 1,000-mile-per-hour winds. People survived the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Well, nobody really survives it. You're traumatized for the rest of your life. The most scrupulous and important research of the radiation impact on human beings is the research of the consequences of the nuclear explosion in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And most of the radiation metrics that they use around the world for safety are based on Hiroshima and Nagasaki survivors, which is completely disingenuous way to come up with safety laws. It's the industry is lunatic. It's a lunatic industry. The industry it attracts the worst of humanity has to offer. Is research of the consequences of nuclear explosion. So, like, you can't compare a nuclear explosion to Santa Susana, which is equal to 460 3-mile islands. You can't compare it to Fukushima, which is 720-ton reactors atomized and aerosoled, and 5 million pounds in the fuel pools atomized and aerosoled and released into the environment in multiple buildings. You can't compare that tonnage to 15 pounds. And because reactors constantly are in a meltdown mode, they're consuming everything around them and atomizing, aerosoling, ionizing, radiating it, and releasing it into the environment. Two plumes that covers the planet. But we're talking about extremely important short-term effect of nuclear war, the medical legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even in the late spring of 1945, there was considerable discussion among the U.S. military planners as to which cities should be targeted for the first nuclear weapon to be exploded over a general population. They're not using it to take out an airfield with all kinds of military planes or take out the shipyard with all kinds of military ships. They were seeking women and children and kids. That's what I mean. It's the definition of coward. It's an incredible cowardly thing to do. Because it's never been done to them, right? Is why they done it. A strong argument had been made to bomb. Can you imagine if Japan, instead of Pearl Harbor, had fire-bombed California or something like that, where all the schools are to. Imagine what propaganda would be like even today. A strong argument had been made to bomb Kyoto, but this was rejected by the Secretary of War, in spite of the powerful arguments that Kyoto was a large enough city to provide adequate demonstrations of American nuclear capabilities. They succeeded fully that Kyoto was simply too important as historical and spiritual center to be devastated. But they had to convince them because they wanted to do it. The military-industrial complex, there's nothing off the table. These are lunatics. Approximately half the radiation energy released was in the form of neutron rays, which are particularly damaging the biological tissues. Half the radiation energy was the neutron. The story of the journalist who exposed the Hiroshima cover-up fallout. When the U.S. military dropped atomic bombs in Japan's cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, the American government portrayed the weapons as equivalent to large conventional bombs and dismissed the Japanese reports of radiation sickness as propaganda. Because they were aware of the radiation this thing was going to create. So, like, this was the nuclear industry that done this, by the way. This is the same industry that is, like, the IAEA is created from this industry, was created by this very industry. Military censors restricted access to Hiroshima, but a young journalist named John Hershey managed to get there and write a devastating account of the death, destruction, and radiation poisoning. Radiation poisoning. And for 77 years, they've been hiding the radiation poisoning. Because otherwise, they would have to abandon Hiroshima and Nagasaki today. Which is what they should be doing, right? And then the people that done this should be arrested, sentenced to death, and then killed by sledgehammers. The U.S. military created a massive, inconceivable public relation campaign to combat the notion that the nuclear industry had decimated the populations with a really destructive radiological weapon. Leslie Groves, who directed the Manhattan Project, and Robert Oppenheimer, who directed the Manhattan Project laboratories at the nuclear wasteland known as Los Alamos, which is 1,800 square miles of nuclear wasteland, themselves went to the Trinity site of testing in New Mexico and brought a junket of reporters so they could show off the area. And they said there was no residual radiation whatsoever, and that therefore any news that was filtering over from Japan were Tokyo tales. So right away they went into overdrive to contain that narrative. They brought the reporters to the nuclear wasteland and said, see, there's nothing wrong. Because you can't see it or smell it or touch it or hear it or taste it or feel it or pick it up. The essay just really imbued the event with a sobriety that really hadn't been there before. And also it just completely deprived the U.S. government of the ability to be able to paint nuclear bombs as conventional weapons. Hershey himself later said the thing that kept the world safe from another nuclear attack since 1945 has been the memory of what happened in Hiroshima. And he certainly created a cornerstone of that. This was a rather unique interview. He was on the outskirts of Hiroshima. They gave him a script to read, and it's propaganda to do what we just read. I'm going to play it for you.
How many people do you think were killed?
All of us who lived through this experience at the spot estimate the numbers of death at least at 100,000. This estimate is not based on official figures, but just on a knowledge of special groups under the population.
Was there anybody to take charge of the city after the disaster?
There was nobody to take charge after the disaster because all important people were practically killed. The mayor, the commander of the city, many high-ranking officers, a Korean prince, which was stationed at the time in Hiroshima, and also the regiments of the city were wiped out.
What is your opinion as to the story that the ruins of the city emitted deadly rays?
Well, I think that it's just a rumor. Because I myself and others of us have worked in the city itself immediately after the explosion for several hours, and we felt no ill effect at all.
Tell me a little about the Japanese reaction towards the Americans and towards the atomic bomb.
Neither myself nor anybody of our fathers heard a single outburst of hate against the Americans in those terrible days. And during the whole war, we didn't experience much about hatred against the Allied. As a matter of fact, at the beginning of the war, after the big Japanese victories, the Japanese were inclined to look down on the enemy. But then, after the offensive went off according to schedule, they began to admire the skill of the Americans. And especially since the majestic B-29 appeared over Tokyo, practically every Japanese admired the technical skill of the Americans.
Father, what is your and your colleagues' opinion as to the use of the atomic bomb?
We have discussed among ourselves the ethics of the use of the bomb. Some consider it in the same category as poison gas and were against its use on the civilian population. Others were of the view that in total war as carried on in Japan, there was no difference between civilians and soldiers, and that the bomb itself was an effective force tending to end the bloodshed, warning Japan to surrender and thus to avoid total destruction. It seems logical to me that he who supports total war in principle cannot complain of a war against civilians. The crux of the matter is whether total war in its present form is justifiable even when it serves a just purpose. Does it not have material and spiritual evil as its consequences which far exceed whatever the good that might result? When will our moralists give us a clear answer to this question?
So he was supposed to be doing an interview, but he's reading a script. And he justifying killing the civilians. Well, he's reading a script. And all the questions are perfect for the script. He hasn't got to go through the script looking for the answer. He just stops where he's supposed to, and then when he says something, he looks down and starts reading it again. It's absurd. It's absolutely frightening that people like that exist. Internal plutonium radiation exposures in Nagasaki's atomic bomb victims. But Dana, there was no internal contamination from dropping a big nuclear weapon on their heads, Dana. Radiation dose received by Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bomb survivors evaluated from data related only to external exposures. How can you get only external exposures? Like, there can only be, there was no radiation or there's radiation. It can't be just external radiation. And so the people that, the scary thing is the people that made that rules where there's only external, no internal, their children probably got the same job today. Or their grandchildren. However, we assume that the contribution of internal exposure cannot be ruled out. Like, this is an academic we're talking about that is saying that. It's like saying, no, you got 2 left feet. Now, I'll check you, and there's a small possibility that you might have a left foot and a right foot. But that, you can't say that. I have to do the science first to prove that. Because, like, that makes more sense than what they're saying. Global transport of plutonium from Nagasaki to the Arctic. So you can't have global transport of radioactive fallout without the people at ground zero breathing it in too. You can't. But, like, why are we having a debate about something like this? How is that even possible 77 years later? They're still denying that people breathe in radiation. They got external radiation, Dana, but not internal, Dana. Like, imagine someone saying that to me. They're not going to use that kind of aggression when they're saying it either. They're going to, like, there's no evidence that people ingested any radiation. You have no evidence to support that. No evidence at all. My professor told me global transport of plutonium from Nagasaki to the Arctic. How can you get radiation traveling all the way to the Arctic, but people at ground zero didn't breathe, or in Japan didn't breathe any in? It's like, you can't make it to Nagasaki without covering Japan too. You know, picked up a million pounds of Earth. It ionized, radiated, atomized, and aerosoled it. That was all radioactive. That's how this works. See? A historical event to release of man-made global pollutants was observed at Nagasaki, which was the plutonium bomb, which was 10 to 15 kilograms. So over 30 pounds of plutonium is an absurd number, by the way. The only uranium bomb ever used was Hiroshima. Everything else is a plutonium bomb. The industry is so evil. I can go for days and days and days without stopping, 24 hours a day, and just show you absurd evilness. I can't do a single 3 minutes on good nuclear. So 13.8 kilograms, 3.4 times 10 to the 13 becquerels, which is a trillion, is it? Of 239, 240. 239 is the nasty one. The other ones are still terrible. But 239 is just a horrific isotope. We're discharged into the atmosphere along with the fission product. Because it's not just plutonium, obviously, right? Which is 3.9 times a billion atomic decays. It was infinitely more than that, and that is a terrible number, by the way. Total amount of disposition in the local fallout region was 264 square kilometers. So 264, everything was radioactive for 264 kilometers, except for Hiroshima or Nagasaki, whatever one the study is about. Yeah, this is the Nagasaki study. So Nagasaki was 264 square kilometers of radioactive fallout, but not at the Nagasaki itself, Dana, but everywhere else. But if you were in Nagasaki, you did not breathe in radiation. What about they went out into that 264 square kilometer zone? Well, yeah, then they breathed in radiation. But they didn't. Well, of course they did. They had to rebuild the city. They had to go somewhere. No, we kept them there, right on ground zero. Perfect human guinea pigs. Did they complain? Oh, yeah, but we're the government. We don't listen to complaints. Was it an evil crime to only study external contamination of Hiroshima and Nagasaki human guinea pigs? Well, we got 100% people says, yeah, that was disgusting. Radionuclides released from the Nagasaki explosion is detected in the Arctic ice core layers of 1945. That's impossible, Dana. Nobody in Nagasaki had radiation illnesses. Mom, I can hear nuclear scientists around the world. Mom, come down in the basement. Nuclear scientists, moms will go down in the basement and they'll be screeching. Dana said they got radiation poisoning. Mom, tell him he didn't. Beat him up for me, Mommy. At least 100 nuclear scientist parents right now are trying to console their nuclear scientist child. Who sat home sucking her thumb away watching this. Long-term consequences of atomic bombing in Hiroshima. What do you mean long-term consequences? They rebuilt the city in a nuclear wasteland. Dana, get with it. The Peace Institute. Imagine building a city in a nuclear wasteland. A bomb crater. Because that's what makes the story bizarre on top of everything else is they built the city back on a nuclear bomb crater so the sadistic medical community can study him long term. External doses, right? Like, it's pretty easy to show that these people should all be put in car crushers or something. So, you can't let them run around. Can't let them have children, for God's sakes. It's absurd. We examined long-term consequences of atomic bombing that occurred in long-term consequences of an atomic bombing in Hiroshima. Long-term consequences. Well, he rebuilt the city, Dana. There's got to be consequences. I know, I'm just trying to tell you the story. On the clear, peaceful, and ordinary morning of August the 6th, 1945, an atomic bomb was delivered from the U.S. military plane Enola Gay to the center of the city of Hiroshima. It exploded 600 meters and released a tremendous and harmful amount of severe radiation. So the official story says these studies I'm showing you do not exist. The official word, right, is that the stuff I'm showing you does not exist. The nuclear industry worldwide, particularly here, the IAEA, vehemently deny that anybody had internal exposures. The World Health Organizations, the ERPA and UNSCLEAR, all vehemently deny that people were breathing radioactive elements into their bodies. Heat rays, overwhelming force in the heat of the blast with a large fireball. And a tremendous and harmful amount of severe radiation. The number of acute deaths from the bomb is estimated 90 to 166,000 people, and a significant proportion of Hiroshima City's total population is 340,000 to 350,000 victims. Includes deaths that were instant as well as those who died within 2 to 4 months after the bombing, attributable to radiation exposure, i.e. fallout, also called black rain. But there wasn't just, the only fallout wasn't from black rain. But there was a lot because of the black rain, right? Radiation exposure. Is there any way not to get radiation exposure in a nuclear wasteland? And the number of survivors who declared themselves as having been exposed to radiation, called habakusha, both in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were counted to be approximately 280,000 in the national census administered in 1950 by the government that denies that radioactive fallout happened in a nuclear wasteland. A tremendous intensive, hundreds of thousands of studies. And the focus on the research has been mainly the after effects of radiation exposure on health, especially the incidences of cancer and leukemias. Again, right, this, you won't hear him talk about any other things, just cancers. And when they do that, it means because there was a savage amount of heart problems and liver problems and lung problems and respiratories and pituitary and thyroid and adrenaline glands. The findings from these surveys are summarized as follows. 1, cancers of specific organs are more frequent among the atomic bomb survivors. 2nd, non-cancer diseases like cardiacs, benign thyroid tumors, heart diseases, strokes, deterioration of the immune system, similar to that observed with aging, and minor inflammatory reactions are more likely observed in survivors exposed to high doses of radiation. Neither genetic effects nor an increase in mortality or incidences of cancer has been confirmed to date among the survivors' children. And one of the things was, if the children grew up and became smokers or drinkers, their cancers were contributed to the smoking and drinking, not Hiroshima. Geraldine Thomas from the United Kingdom is one of the ones who lead the charges on no illnesses in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, or Chernobyl, or Fukushima. A noteworthy example is social discrimination against survivors, either explicit or implicit. For example, a survivor could not get married, they couldn't attain desirable educations or gain a good job, but a fact or even a simple prejudgment that he or she was exposed to radiation by the atomic bombing. In other words, after effects of the atomic bombing could be observed in survivors' life events such as educational attainment, employment, family formations. Thus, besides potentially health and medical issues, such adverse effects could be found in economics and social sources over a lifetime. Because Japan is a bigoted society as it is. More than 70 years have passed since the bombing, and those who were directly affected are very advanced in ages. So if they managed to live into a normal cycle, then any health problems were attributed to being that age. Not Hiroshima, not Nagasaki. Fallout, melt, debris, and aerodynamically shaped glass in the beach sands of Hiroshima Bay, Japan. And so lots of that's going to wash down to the coastline every time it rains, right? And it did. And it's still there today. The study interprets the large volumes of fallout. The large volumes of fallout that the medical community refused to acknowledge exist. The study interprets the large volume of fallout health effects of the atomic bomb radiation. Increased radiation risks associated with malignant diseases among survivors, including babies who are in the womb. And possible risks for non-cancer diseases were also identified, which is very, like I said, it's very rare to have them acknowledge that something else could happen besides cancer. No increased risk due to parental exposure to radiation been observed from malignancies or other diseases among the children who were conceived after parents' exposure to radiation, but continuing investigations are required. Once again, if the children were smokers or drinkers, they were excluded from researches. Health effects of atomic bomb radiation, 1945. The lifespan study of survivors Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the LSS. Recent research has shown the study is unsafe, owing for the presence of significant radiological quantities of uranium-234 present in the black rain, and also the questionable 1973 removal of the not in the city control group. The Japanese government have conceded, following a court case in 2021, that cancers in the Japanese Hibakusha who were affected by the black rain developed cancer with zero external dose, thus admitting that the LSS basis of the risk model is unsafe. Evidence is presented that the atmospheric nuclear testing in 1959 to 63 caused the increased global cancer epidemic that began 20 years after the fallout. That the weapons testing was the cause of the increased global cancer epidemic from 1959 to 63. That is a stunning statement right there. That is a stunning statement. This review presents evidence that the methodology that supports the current radiation risk model for cancer is insecure. As a consequence, the legal limits internal exposures to certain common radionuclides are incorrect by several orders of magnitude. And because of this, hundreds of millions of people will develop cancer due to internal exposures from atmospheric testing fallout, nuclear accidents, depleted uranium, and releases from nuclear sites. It's actually billions. Because of this, hundreds of millions of people have developed cancers. It's billions. The review discusses, and it's trillions of animals, insects and birds and ringles. The review discusses the history of the model, refers to published studies that clearly demonstrate the errors. It argues that the ways in which the models were constructed were arbitrary, capricious, and unscientific, and that the linear no-threshold absorbed dose model was assembled before the discovery of DNA as a target for radiation health effects, yet had not essentially altered since then, despite scientific and epidemiological evidence that strictly falsified it. Forged, faked, counterfeit, fabricated, invented, altered, changed, doctored, tampered with, fudged, manipulated. Which is how you would describe nuclear. The errors are so large for certain types of exposure, more than 3 orditudes of magnitude. No one can believe that such a mistake has been made. So when you're talking about joules per kilogram, that's the deception, right? The atom gets in your body, sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. It's pulsing energy every second. Your body attacks it every second of your life with white blood cells and tries to build a tumor around it. To try to say that it has so much energy per kilogram is a complete whitewash of facts. It's despicable. So the LSS, the Japanese lifespan studies, was disgusting betrayal. So many lies, you can't actually keep up with it. Yeah, the ICRP model dilutes the energy into a kilogram and dismisses the resulting nanosieverts as irrelevant and unable to cause cancers. And the ICRP, of course, is United Nations, right? So is IRPA, so is UNCLEAR, so is IAEA. They're all the same organization. They all support each other. Overwhelming evidence. It's Ponzi scheme and overdrive is what it is. It has to stop. It's untenable. The whole organ rather than the cellular nuclei. So they spread the radiation dose out over your whole body when that's not how it works. Alpha particles deposit 625 times more ionizing density than external gamma radiation. And ICRP would cut your throat in a heartbeat. Well, they cut everybody's throat all the time with their propaganda. The evilness of the industry is overdrive, eh? Infant mortality showed, and the downstream cancer effects of fallout were clear by 1990. Hormesis. So they also said that your body can repair man-made radiation. So unless it was a super high dose of many sieverts, your body was going to repair it. The lies were so many lies. 3 kilometers from the hypocenter, Nagasaki, was 200 to 300 times background. So ground zero would have been brutal. A 500 microsievert dose had to have existed more than 3 kilometers with 0 external prompts. And dose was usually associated with pills, like not with radiation, right? The main basis for determination of cancer coefficiency is the lifespan study of the Japanese A-bomb survivors. The main basis for determination of cancer from nuclear plants and everything else is based on Japanese A-bomb survivors. A total whitewash. The whole thing needs to be destroyed, and we need to come up with real rules, which are described as the gold standards for radiation is the survivors of an atomic bomb. So when you use that model at a nuclear meltdown, everybody's a victim forever. It's evil, no matter how you try to spin it. When it comes out of the wash, it's going to be still evil, incredibly evil. Yeah, they refused to acknowledge the radioactive fallout. And so when they finally were forced to acknowledge it, they only acknowledged so-called black rain. Because the people went there and cleaned it up and rebuilt the city would have got incredible doses too, see? The people that went there after and lived there will get doses that are unacceptable. But so they made it acceptable by lying. They only built the city just so they can study the people, so they can downplay it. To use it as the litany when it didn't exist in the first place. It's just, there's so many lies you can't actually keep up with it. You actually can't keep up with it. Japan's extremely good at being evil. Does tourism illuminate the darkness of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Yes, it does, actually. Radiation experiments on people in the United States. This was the plutonium files, I think. There was over 4,000 radiation experiments on people. One of them was where they took 800 pregnant women And they gave them vitamin drinks and vitamin shots that were actually uranium and plutonium. Not a single vitamin in any of the shots. And then when the children died, they dug up the bodies after everybody went home, took the bodies to Los Alamos and incinerated the babies' bodies and sniffed it for plutonium and other radiation. Other radionuclide injections are described are widely known after the publication of the book Plutonium Files. Yeah, no matter how you look at it, this industry was kooky. The reservoirs were full of cesium and plutonium, but nobody ingested radiation, is the official story. And in toxicity, plutonium, americium, curium is legendary. Radiation-induced deaths from leukemia and from cancers of the bones, liver, lungs, and intestines. Plutonium mass balance release from Nagasaki A-bomb. Well, like, there's so much evidence that people... Because everything is about... All the radiation standards are based upon the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That should frighten the daylights out of everybody on the planet. It's still classified at the time. That was 1995. Everything was still classified from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A very light wind, 3.7 meters a second. The amount of both local and global radioactive fallout. Global radioactive fallout. Concentrations in soil, reservoir, vegetation, fish, up to 100 kilometers from the hypocenter. Plutonium was deposited throughout the northern hemisphere as global fallout. Okay. Radiation as a weapon of mass destruction. Radiation. So if it rained, black rain, then the aquifers would have been poisoned, right? Radiation as a weapon of mass destruction. No attempt since Hiroshima and Nagasaki of weapons of mass destruction with radiation has been successful. That's not true. They use dirty bombs all the time. They call it depleted uranium. They're dirty bombs, right? Cancers incidences in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 1958 to 1987. Now have among the highest rates of liver cancer in the world. The population of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have the highest rates of liver cancer in the world. It's a total coincidence. The fuzzy theory from Japan's Atomic Energy Research Institute. If I broke down, so if I got a flat tire in front of the Japan's Atomic Energy Research Institute in Japan, and they came out and wanted to help me, I would run away. The survivors of the atomic bombing and those who visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the atomic bombing could have been subject to many other possible noxious effects in addition to atomic radiation. Yeah, because hospitals, laboratories, drugstores, chemical storehouses were all evaporated. Gasoline, mustard gas for chemical weapons, possibly included. But the Japanese government and the nuclear industry refused to acknowledge anything existed. Definitely not nuclear. So they blame it on everything but nuclear. High incidences of cancer in the survivors of Hiroshima. Dementia, trouble talking, vision problems, one-sided weakness, loss of bladder control. Residual radiation, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Learning disabilities in individuals exposed prenatally to ionizing radiation, to Hiroshima and Nagasaki experiences. This is super important. All of this stuff is incredibly ignored. Hacking. Bone sarcomas in atomic bomb survivors, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then he built it back on a nuclear built the cities back on a nuclear wasteland. All the other nuclear bomb craters don't have cities built in them or communities near them. Let me see. So brain tumors were quite common. Plutonium released by the Nagasaki A-bomb. Mobility in the environment. Heavy disposition from Nagasaki local fallout in 1945 was found in sediment cores collected from Nishiyama Reservoir. Leukemia, chronic leukemia. This is Robert Peter Gale. He'd cut your throat so quick. He's despicable. He's an incredibly despicable person. was not induced in adult Nagasaki A-bomb survivors. Was delayed threefold in most Hiroshima females. And talking about people exposed to a sievert of radiation. Robert Gale is a disgusting parasite, isn't he? How much evidence do you need anyway, I wonder? Incidences of leukemia survivors, atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Lost track a long time ago how many studies these people have done on the victims. Several 100,000 that radiation injuries with notes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Studies of atomic bomb survivors. Leukemia, thyroid cancers among A-bomb survivors. Skin cancer among the A-bomb survivors. Hypothesis to explain childhood cancer near nuclear power plants. What was that one again? Over 60 studies worldwide on increased cancers near nuclear power plants. Oh, who done that study? Oh, yeah, that study. He was trying to blame it on when they changed the fuel. But the fuel pools are hemorrhaging, still splitting the atom all day, every day. These are disease factories, right? All day. The numbers are stunning that are released because there's no containment on the fuel pools, right? They're still splitting the atoms. He tried to blame it on when they're changing fuel, there's a release of radiation. Which is true, but the fuel pools are hemorrhaging at 24 hours a day. The Sisters of Nagasaki wins an international award from Canada. But a group of Catholic nuns who survived the atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Criminal. Japan shipping £500 million of deadly Fukushima radioactive rice each year. That's so evil, man. Why are you so evil, Duke? Chromosome aberrations in the older survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Analysts radiation-induced chromosome translocation in Hiroshima, A-bomb. It's supposed to be A-bomb. Survivors. Radiation injuries with notes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. UV radiation may explain intercity differences from cardiacs in A-bomb survivors. But, like, you wear those glasses for bomb testing. You remember, you'll see it if you look it up. Because, not because of the UV per se radiation. Yeah, well, I guess it is from the bomb itself. High temperature, right? It'll blind you. £500 million of rice shipped out of Fukushima each year. It was actually more than that. It's almost £1 billion. But remember, 14 prefectures were radioactive, not just Fukushima. Long-term follow-up of the atomic bomb survivors, of atomic bomb guinea pigs. Who done that study? Oh, yeah. The physical growth development of children who survived atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Stanford University. They're disgusting. Results of mass screening for breast cancer in atomic bomb survivors. Radon measurement in residential housing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some sick stuff there, man. That's England, of course. What do you expect? Lesions to the eyeballs following atomic bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There's so much. I got 1,400 clicks for tonight. I'm not going to get through tonight, right? We'll do part 2 on the 9th. I don't know if I'll be around on the 9th, actually. Yeah, I'll be here on the 9th. City effects and atomic bomb survivor data. They studied every hair on everybody's head. The kooky world of nuclear. Because that's the only way you can probably describe this industry. That makes more sense, right? The kooky, sadistic, twisted world of nuclear. There's lots of nonsense that showed up yesterday and today on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Lots of junk. Wow, man. I was gonna do a video on propaganda and I didn't. Because there's so much what I call nuke tart junk. Look over here, don't look over there. It shocked me, actually. That's what the nuclear industry does, though. It shocks you, eh? Nice, beautiful green screen. I used that as a divider, and I accidentally clicked on it in another page, so I won't get rid of that tonight. That'll be there all night in my face. Bear with me. Almost. Okay, well. Let's look at the poll here. We're going to call it quits, I guess, right here. Because this is such a weird subject every time you try to have a conversation. Was it an evil crime to only study external contamination of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki human guinea pigs? And everybody agreed. Somebody accidentally clicked no. So basically everybody agreed that that was crimes against humanity. Which was the right answer. It was, right? The academic community let the victims of industrial industries like nuclear is the worst one. Nuclear is a sadistic industry. Thank you, Obsolete Optics. I'm going to quick shout out to everybody. Tomorrow night is a Fukushima show. Tomorrow night is Monday night. Then the next night is Nagasaki anniversary, so we'll do another Hiroshima Nagasaki show for Tuesday. Good night, everybody. Dana Nasana. Peace Swear. Don Vincent. Hello, everybody. Onion Breath. Great name. Darlene. Melanie. Hello, everybody. Joe. Provoke. Richard. John Curtis. Thinker. Good night, everybody. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. I'll be busy all night, all day tomorrow. We'll be back tomorrow night with another sadistic nuclear show known as Fukushima and Nuclear Meltdowns and Radioactive News. The pro-nuclear scumbag show, basically. Yeah, we call our show the pro-nuclear degenerate scumbag show. Because that's the only way you can describe the nuclear industry without getting banned, right? So, the nuclear industry is a bunch of cowards and murderers on top of that. So that's the worst combination. They're a threat to the existence of humans and species from the radioactive fallout from multiple fuel pools worldwide. Over 1,000 of them are hemorrhaging invisible plumes of death into your environment. It's time to take back your planet. You are running out of time. Gotta watch it when I'm talking because I'm not looking for names. Ayers. Good night, everybody. Kevin Blanche. Jeff Poor. Darrell Murray, another Gmail. Thanks, Dana. Dana Nasana. Obsolete Optics. I think I already said goodnight. I know Coletta's out there somewhere. James Luce's out there somewhere. Chelsea's out there somewhere. Swanee D will be out there in the morning. Wherever he's to catch the show. Let's close the poll down. 41 votes. Was it an evil, despicable, disgusting, revolting crime to only study the external contamination of the Hiroshima Nagasaki victims? And we have a resounding 98%. So, yeah, of course it is, Dana. That's it for Dana. We raised $154 from James Lucet on Thursday, the last show. That was a huge deal. I fired up the boat on the weekend. I'll put some videos of that tomorrow night for you. It's not in the water yet. We're still waiting for... We still need to buy one part for the boat. Because it won't go past half speed. It'll cut out. And the siren goes off the whole time. Drive you insane, right? I'll talk about it maybe tomorrow night when I show some videos of it. Thank you, Jeff. Let's call it a night. If you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Nuclear industry will block you anyway. Did you see on the community on my page? I'll show you something. My last video on Friday or Thursday, after 5 hours I had 191 views. After 11 hours I had 167 views. So they rolled back my numbers, eh? Not much. I can't do nothing about it. I'd break their neck if I caught them, but they're pretty slippery. That's what reptiles are. They're pretty slippery, pretty hard to hang on to. Just imagine how pathetic you are that your job is to censor me. Imagine what kind of pointless, bizarre human you got to be to do that job. Imagine how far down the bottom of the food chain you are when your job is to censor me. It's hilarious. It's very harmful. It's very evil. It's a very insidious thing to do. See everybody tomorrow night. I got a Fukushima show tomorrow night. Thanks for everybody. Have a great night, folks. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. The last two links under the description are the only two links where you can donate to me. We want to get the boat in the water. We got to fill the boat up. We got to get parts. I'd like to go on a research expedition. The year is running out. We got to get in gear, okay? And if I didn't get sick, I would have been in gear. And so I'm just going to go. We got mass die-offs happening down here. Mass bird die-off, multiple species. We can't even get out and investigate it. We'll get there. We're getting there. But we can't do it without your help. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. We'll see everybody on the next show. Take care, folks.